From a pig farmer who fed human flesh to his pig to a self-proclaimed cannibal who got famous for eating his classmate. This is ranking the world's most evil humans in history. Part 2. Anders Breivik. If you ever wondered what happens when a Reddit comment section turns into a person, here's your answer. In 2011, this Norwegian extremist carried out one of the deadliest solo attacks in modern history. First, he set off a car bomb in Oslo, killing 8 people. But he wasn't done. Dressed as a police officer, he took a ferry to Utoya Island, where a political youth camp was underway, and opened fire, murdering 69 people, most of them teenagers. And guess what his twisted motive is? Saving Europe from multiculturalism. Yeah, saving it by literally wiping out the future generation. Breivik planned this for years, complete with a manifesto no one asked for. And when caught, he posed for cameras like he just won an award. Norway gave him 21 years, which sounds light until you realize that's basically forever there because they can extend it indefinitely. Oh, this is S tier, no debate. This isn't just evil. This is straight up Netflix documentary series with ominous piano music levels of horror. Richard Ramirez, aka the Night Stalker. If Satan had a hype man, it'd probably be this guy. Born in El Paso, Texas in 1960, Ramirez's villain origin story reads like something ripped straight from a horror script. By 12 years old, his cousin, a Vietnam War veteran, was showing him photos of people he'd allegedly raped, tortured, and killed. And as a bonus trauma package, Ramirez literally watched that same cousin shoot his wife in the face right in front of him. So yeah, therapy might have been a good idea. Fast forward to the mid-80s. Ramirez moves to Los Angeles and starts living out his full-time nightmare career. Between 1984 and 1985, he broke into homes, murdering at least 13 people, raping others, and attacking anyone who crossed his path. Men, women, kids, the elderly. He had no pattern, just pure chaos. Some nights it was a gun, other nights a tire iron, maybe a knife, maybe his bare hands. And to top it off, he left pentagrams at crime scenes because apparently Satan needed some street marketing. By the end, LA was in full panic mode. But after months of fear, Ramirez's run finally ended in August 1985 when his face was plastered across newspapers and TV screens. The very next day, someone spotted him on the street in East Los Angeles. He tried to steal a car to get away, but a group of locals recognized him, chased him down, and held him until the police arrived. Just like that, the Night Stalker was finally off the streets. And even after all that, Ramirez showed up to court with sunglasses, a pentagram on his palm, and shouted, "Hail Satan," like he was trying out for the world's worst rock band. Definitely S tier. The guy was American Horror Story before the show even existed. If you make an entire city sleep with the lights on for a year, yeah, you've earned it. And hey, while Ramirez had LA sleeping with the lights on, you can sleep easy knowing you hit that subscribe button. Go on. Before the Night Stalker finds out you didn't. Peter Scully. You know you've hit rock bottom of humanity when your crimes make even hardened detectives question life. He was born in 1963 in Melbourne, Australia, and claimed that he had been raped by a priest as a child. And instead of focusing on his mental health and working on himself, he decided to become someone else's nightmare. He was living in Melbourne with his wife and 2 children, and yet decided to create one of the most outrageous crimes ever. Peter filmed himself sexually abusing 2 kidnapped girls aged 10 and 11 and made them dig what they believed to be their own grave. But as the investigation kept going, it was discovered that he raped and tortured 75 children, filmed the scenario, and sold the video on the dark web. Operating on the dark web, Scully produced and sold videos of unspeakable abuse, with his most infamous series titled Daisy's Destruction. And yeah, the name sounds innocent, until you realize it involved torture of children so vile that even seasoned law enforcement described it as the worst of the worst. After years of being hunted, Scully was finally arrested in 2015, and he is now serving life in prison, where, let's be honest, he deserves every second of whatever hell that is. If there was ever a guy the phrase "throw away the key" was invented for, it's this one. It's tier. No hesitation. This isn't just evil. This is, there's not enough fire in hell for this guy type of evil. Absolutely revolting. Issei Sagawa, the man who made Dinner with Friends a cautionary tale. In 1981, while studying in Paris, Sagawa invited his classmate Renee Hartevelt over to his apartment. Once there, he shot her. And what followed was something straight out of a horror novel. he cannibalized her body over the next few days, claiming it was his lifelong fantasy to absorb her beauty. But here's the plot twist. After being caught, Sagawa was declared legally insane and deported back to Japan, where he was released. Yep, man murdered and ate someone, and then went on to live as a free man, writing books, giving interviews, and basically cashing in on his own crime. Imagine turning into a true crime celebrity after literal cannibalism. Issei spent the rest of his life talking openly about his crimes like it was some quirky fact on his resume. Oh yeah, and by the way, I once ate my classmate. Dropping him in A tier because while the crime itself is straight up horrifying, the fact that he basically walked free and profited from it makes this whole case feel like some bad dystopian movie. Absolutely unreal. Gilberto Valle, also known as the Cannibal Cop. And no, that's not a movie title. That's a real guy who worked as an NYPD officer while secretly planning some of the most disturbing crimes imaginable. In 2012, his wife stumbled upon his laptop and found something no spouse should ever have to see. Detailed chat logs where Valle shared his fantasies about kidnapping, torturing, cooking, and eating women, including women he personally knew. He mapped out plans, discussed recipes, and even Googled how to build a human-sized oven. So yeah, pretty concerning. Authorities arrested Valle before he could act on any of these fantasies, but his case became a legal circus. His defense argued it was all just fantasy, like some kind of horrifying roleplay. And after his initial 2013 conviction, an appeals court actually overturned it, saying there wasn't enough proof that he was seriously going to follow through. So now the Cannibal Cop walks free, which, you know, is deeply unsettling for anyone who prefers their dinner guests not to think about marinating them. We're sticking him in B tier. Why? Because while it was all in his head, allegedly, the sheer amount of planning, detail, and how close it felt to becoming real makes this nightmare feel way too real. Elizabeth Bathory, aka the Blood Countess. If vampire cosplay had a leaderboard, she's in first place. Living in Hungary during the late 1500s, she allegedly tortured and killed up to 600 young girls. Yep, 600. Why? According to legend, she thought bathing in their blood would keep her young. She ran a whole operation, luring peasants to her castle with the promise of work, only for them to become skincare products. It's giving DIY anti-aging serum in the worst way possible. Well, it actually looks like a movie, right? But reports say she was into beatings, burning, biting, and just about every other medieval torture tactic you could Google. Eventually, even royalty was like, hey, Liz, maybe chill. And she was locked away in her own castle until she died. Honestly, it's a miracle this story isn't already a Netflix limited series. Straight to S tier, no arguments. I mean, Vampire Queen energy, hundreds of victims, and bloodbaths? That's Hollywood villain status. Donald Trump, real estate mogul, reality TV star, president, and, of course, Jeffrey Epstein's party buddy, allegedly. Trump's connection to Epstein is the stuff conspiracy theories are made of. Photos? Plenty. A 1992 party where it was just Trump, Epstein, and 28 women? Yep, that happened. Trump once called Epstein a terrific guy who liked his women on the younger side. And while Trump denied involvement once Epstein's crimes hit the spotlight, the internet has never let it go. Now, does that make Trump a serial killer? No. But when you're constantly mentioned in the same sentence as a guy who literally ran a global trafficking ring, the optics are, let's just say, bad. Mix that with lawsuits, accusations, and being banned from Twitter, and you've got a guy who's been living in the main character seat of controversy for decades. We're parking him in C tier, not because the accusations are light, but because he somehow always escapes the boss fights. Like, how is this man still a president? You think Donald is insane? Keep watching, because we're about to reveal an even crazier ex-president. Hit that subscribe button and make tier list great again. Albert Fish, the granddaddy of nightmare fuel. If you've ever thought, man, true crime stories can't get worse, congrats, you haven't met Fish. Active in the early 1900s, Fish was a serial killer, child molester, cannibal, and just all-around walking demon. His most infamous crime? In 1928, he kidnapped a 10-year-old girl named Grace Budd, murdered her, cooked her, and then sent a letter to her family describing exactly how he prepared the meal. That's right. This man was out here writing recipes like some cursed version of Gordon Ramsay. Beyond that, Fish bragged about sticking needles into his own body, eating raw meat, and hearing voices telling him to do it all. Thankfully, after years of horror, he was caught and executed via electric chair in 1936, probably the only time in history people cheered for a power outage. S tier. Easily. This man wasn't just evil, he was the origin story for half the horror movies we have today. Throw the whole century away. Luis Alfredo Garavito, nicknamed La Bestia, which literally means the beast. And honestly, that might still be too nice. This Colombian serial killer is considered one of the worst in history, responsible for the torture, rape, and murder of at least 190 children during the 1990s, and some believe the number could be over 300. Garavito's targets were often street children, the ones most people overlook. He'd offer them food, money, or work, gaining their trust before leading them to remote areas where the unimaginable happened. He used disguises: a priest, a teacher, a farmer, basically whatever it took to make kids feel safe. And it gets worse. After his arrest in 1999, Garavito confessed in chilling detail, showing investigators where he'd buried victims. His sentence? Originally 1,853 years in prison. But due to Colombian law, the maximum time anyone can serve is 40 years. And thanks to good behavior, there was even talk of an early release. Thankfully, public outrage shut that down. Straight to S tier. No hesitation. When you're breaking world records for the worst reasons, you don't belong anywhere else. This is evil on a scale that shouldn't even exist. Benjamin Netanyahu, former Prime Minister of Israel, and depending on who you ask, either a strong national leader or the poster child for war crimes accusations. For years, Netanyahu's name has been at the center of global controversy. Critics accuse him of overseeing violent military operations in Gaza that have led to thousands of civilian deaths, with many labeling the actions as crimes against humanity. Add to that the allegations of illegal settlements, forced evictions, and an apartheid-style system, and suddenly, his political career starts looking like an international court case waiting to happen. And if that wasn't enough, Netanyahu's also been battling multiple corruption charges in his own country, including accusations of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. But somehow, like a boss fight that just won't end, he keeps coming back to power. This one lands in B tier. Why? Because while the accusations are massive, he's still playing the political game like it's his personal video loop, and we're all stuck watching the replay. Charles Ng, a man who decided regular crimes weren't enough, so he teamed up with fellow psychopath Leonard Lake to go full horror movie mode. In the early 1980s, Ng and Lake built a bunker in California, which became their own private torture chamber. Their hobby? Kidnapping people, forcing them to star in home videos of their own torture, and eventually killing them. They targeted entire families. Men were executed quickly, but women, they were held captive, assaulted, and filmed until Ng and Lake decided they were done. The total victim count, likely over 25, though no one knows for sure because the evidence was so gruesome. Lake avoided justice by swallowing cyanide when he was caught. But Ng wasn't so lucky. He fled to Canada, got arrested, and after years of legal delays, was finally convicted and sentenced to death in 1999. S tier. Without question. Ng wasn't just a killer. He was a real-life slasher film, complete with a bunker, cameras, and the absolute worst script imaginable. You won't believe the insane stories coming up next. From ruthless warlords to terrifying serial killers, the worst is yet to come. Joe Biden. The man. The meme. The secret leader of the deep state. According to the internet, yes. While the actual provable crimes tied to Uncle Joe are, well, basically none, that hasn't stopped the conspiracy factory from working overtime. If you scroll far enough down Twitter, you'll find people claiming Biden is part of a global elite trafficking ring, a clone, or even a puppet controlled by shadowy billionaires. There are endless rumors about his involvement with Ukraine, hidden deals with China, and whispers that he's just a front for something bigger. And let's not forget the endless gags about his memory, age, and where am I? Moments at press conferences, which the internet uses as proof that someone else is secretly running the country. Is any of that real? Probably not. But the theories are wildly entertaining if you've got time to waste. Let's put him in D tier. Not for actual crimes, but because he's the only guy on this list famous for things he probably didn't do. Congrats, Joe. You made it through on vibes and conspiracies alone. Ramzan Kadyrov, officially the leader of Chechnya, unofficially the poster child for modern-day dictatorship cosplay. This guy runs his region like it's his own private fight club, except with secret police, torture chambers, and death squad. Since rising to power in 2007, Kadyrov has been accused of running mass executions, abductions, and overseeing concentration-style camps, especially targeting LGBTQ+ people. Survivors describe being kidnapped, beaten, and held without charges for weeks. But Kadyrov? He just smiles for the camera, posts gym selfies, and claims Chechnya has no gay people. Yeah, that's his actual defense. And don't think he stops at locals. Journalists, human rights activists, and even Russian opposition leaders who criticize him tend to disappear or turn up mysteriously dead. Meanwhile, he's on Instagram showing off his luxury cars, pet tigers, and fight night with Vladimir Putin. S tier, obviously. This guy's living proof that some people are just supervillains with social media accounts. Robert Pickton, a Canadian pig farmer who turned his ranch into the most disturbing crime scene in Canadian history. From the late 1980s to early 2000s, women from Vancouver's downtown east side started vanishing. Many of them were marginalized, struggling with addiction, or working as sex workers. The trail of disappearances eventually led authorities to Pickton's farm, and what they found was an absolute horror. Pickton confessed to killing 49 women, though only 26 charges were ever officially filed. He butchered victims and allegedly fed their remains to his pigs, and possibly even mixed human flesh into meat products sold to the public. So yeah, next time someone says farm to table, try not to think of this guy. Police investigations later revealed massive failures to stop him sooner, despite multiple tips over the years. By the time they shut him down in 2002, Pickton had already become one of the deadliest serial killers ever. An easy S tier. Anytime cannibalism, pig farms, and mass murder are in the same sentence, just go ahead and slide the name straight to the top. Osama bin Laden, the face of global terrorism for an entire generation. As the founder of Al-Qaeda, he masterminded the September 11th attacks in 2001, killing nearly 3,000 people and changing the world forever. Before September 11th, bin Laden had already been behind deadly bombings targeting U.S. embassies and military sites, but it was the coordinated hijacking of 4 commercial planes that turned him into public enemy number one worldwide. After the towers fell, the manhunt became the largest in U.S. history, with bin Laden hiding out in Pakistan for nearly a decade until SEAL Team 6 kicked his door down in 2011. But even in death, his influence didn't disappear. Al-Qaeda and other extremist groups continued on, and his actions reshaped global politics, airport security, and the daily vocabulary of terror alerts. No surprises. S tier. When you spend an entire decade at the top of every international most wanted list, this is kind of your default spot. He's Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the man behind ISIS, who decided traditional terrorism wasn't dramatic enough and went for, let's build our own country of nightmares. In 2014, al-Baghdadi declared himself the caliph of the so-called Islamic State, taking over huge chunks of Iraq and Syria. Under his rule, ISIS carried out mass executions, beheadings, and public displays of brutality that felt straight out of a medieval horror film. Entire towns were wiped out, ancient landmarks were destroyed, millions were displaced. And while most terrorist leaders lay low, al-Baghdadi filmed slick propaganda videos calling for global jihad like it was a reality show pilot. His reign finally ended in 2019 when US forces cornered him during a raid. Rather than be captured, he blew himself up. Yeah, S tier, obviously. Leading the most violent terror group of modern times comes with an automatic spot on the list. Basically, if bin Laden was season 1, al-Baghdadi was season 2. Bloodier and worse. Luca Magnotta. Proof that sometimes the most disturbing criminals are also the most desperate for internet fame. In 2012, Magnotta posted a video online called One Lunatic, One Ice Pick. And yes, it's exactly as horrific as it sounds. In the video, he murdered and dismembered a Chinese international student named Jun Lin, filmed the entire thing, and uploaded it to shock the world. But Luca wasn't done. He mailed body parts to Canadian government offices and schools, turning this into a full-blown national nightmare. And if that wasn't enough, he led police on an international manhunt, fleeing from Canada to Europe, where he was finally caught in Germany, while casually reading news articles about himself at an internet cafe. His trial revealed that Luca had been obsessed with infamy for years, even creating fake fan pages and rumors about himself online to become some kind of twisted celebrity. This guy is A tier. His crimes were horrific, but the almost theatrical level of narcissism and self-promotion turned this from horrifying to downright unreal. It's giving true crime influencer, and we did not need that. Jeffrey Dahmer, the man who officially ruined apartment cooking smells for everyone. Between 1978 and 1991, Dahmer murdered 17 young men in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But these weren't just murders. Dahmer's crimes involved sexual assault, dismemberment, necrophilia, and cannibalism. Yes, cannibalism. He literally stored body parts in his fridge and freezer like leftovers. What makes it even worse? Neighbors had been complaining about weird smells and noises for months, but no one realized they were living next to one of the most notorious serial killers of all time. He'd lure victims back to his apartment with promises of money or drinks, and they never left. In 1991, after a potential victim escaped and flagged down police, Dahmer was finally arrested. Police found a literal house of horrors inside his apartment, including skulls, photographs, and body parts. S tier, obviously. You don't become the face of Netflix documentaries and Halloween costumes decades later unless your crimes were on a level that most people can barely wrap their heads around. Dahmer was out here collecting body parts. You can just collect subscriptions. Smash that button. No freezer required. Fritzl Josef, the Austrian man who redefined worst father of all time in ways no one asked for. In 1984, Fritzl lured his 18-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, into the basement of their family home and locked her in a secret underground bunker. She wasn't found again until 2008. That's 24 years of captivity. During that time, he repeatedly assaulted her, and she gave birth to 7 children. 3 of whom never saw the outside world until rescue day. Fritzl made up fake stories about Elizabeth running away and even convinced his wife that some of the kids left on their doorstep were from Elizabeth abandoning her children. When authorities finally uncovered the truth, the details were so nightmarish, it shocked the entire world. He was sentenced to life in prison, where he now spends his days exactly where he belongs, locked away from humanity. This is S tier. This isn't just crime. This is silent, hidden, generational horror that unfolded over decades. You couldn't make up something this twisted. Gary Ridgway, also known as the Green River Killer. And if you ever wondered how someone could become the most prolific serial killer in US history, this is your guy. Active during the 1980s and 1990s, Ridgway confessed to killing 71 women, though authorities believe the real number might be closer to 90. His victims were often vulnerable women, including many sex workers, whom he would pick up, strangle, and dump near the Green River in Washington state. And the wild part? Ridgway flew under the radar for decades. He lived a totally average suburban life, worked in a truck factory, and blended in so well that nobody suspected he was out here stacking one of the highest body counts ever recorded. When finally caught in 2001, Ridgway admitted he killed so many people he couldn't even remember all their names. "I killed so many women I lost count," he said. That's not something most people casually forget. S tier all the way. When your hobby becomes serial murder on repeat and you hold actual records for it, you're stuck at the top of the worst list forever. But the nightmare isn't over yet. Did you watch part 1? If not, check it out now to see even more terrifying figures that shaped history in the worst ways. And that's it for part 2 of the world's most evil humans. If you made it this far, congrats. You officially survived the worst dinner party guest list of all time. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what fresh horrors we rank next.